Hello, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles Podcast. I'm the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. Really excited about doing our videos, our podcasting, and to give a little bit of context for those that may not be as familiar with us, I help global families and their family offices solve problems, procure positive future outcomes, and prepare for intergenerational necessity. It's vital for families and their family offices to understand their vulnerabilities and become more resilient so they can mitigate risk and prevail in times of crisis. My experience with some of the wealthiest families in the world has allowed me to distill best practices for discovering purpose and refining vision, governance structures, systems, processes, and culture that successful families and their safeguard family offices need in order to thrive. I help families create or reinvent their family office to be of institutional quality and highly adaptive. Our title of our session today is Using Neuroscience to Enhance Performance and Decision-Making in Investing and Life. Our special guest is David Bach, MD. So we're very fortunate to be joined by David. I'm going to read a little bit of his background. It's very impressive and will set the tone and the context for our discussion today. David Bach, MD, is a Harvard-trained neuroscientist and founder and president of Optios, a San Diego-based neuroperformance company that works with the world's most elite performers, including professional athletes and hedge fund managers. Being based in Greenwich, we know a little bit about that one. Using cutting-edge neuroscience to dramatically enhance their cognitive performance. Prior to founding Optios, he was a serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist, management consultant, scientist, physician, martial artist, and professional cellist as well. Quite the Machiavellian, a man of all worlds. As an entrepreneur, David founded and built 3 prior companies, Touchstone Health, Empyrean Benefit Solutions, and Leprechaun HCC Management. Each of these became a $200 million plus enterprise. His venture capital experience was with TA Associates. Many of you are familiar with them in Boston. We're really excited to have David on today. As noted, attended Harvard College and Harvard Medical School. His scientific training was at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Dr. Bach, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Well, you have such an amazing background. If we had a couple of hours, I'd like to go over pretty much all of that. But we are going to be a little bit more limited on time, but that creates an opportunity for you to come back. Everyone, to give a little bit of context and perhaps being repetitive, but I just want to be clear. This I thought would work best if Dr. Bach gives a presentation. It is going to include a PowerPoint. He's very fluid in it, and it will set an amazing foundation for the topic today. That's going to be approximately 25 minutes. After that, because many of you know this is a subject I'm greatly interested in, I think really at the end of the day, making important decisions is really the most important thing in business and family office and in personal life. The decisions that we make, some of them could be with us forever. So there's lots to discuss. I have lots of questions, and our live audience today will have lots of questions as well, and we encourage you to be interactive through the chat feature. Dr. Bach, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you so much. A couple years ago, my friend Lamar took a martial arts class. One of the things he learned in that class is a technique that you can use to disarm somebody who's holding a gun. The technique he learned, it's a really simple one. You go to your to the assailant and you bend their wrist back, like that. And when you do that, they can't hold the gun anymore. Now, to practice this movement pattern, Lamar partnered up with somebody else in the class, and he practiced the movement for around 20 minutes. So he went to his partner, he bent their wrist back, and then he took away a little plastic gun. And then he handed it back, and then he did it again and again and again. So all in all, over the course of those 20 minutes, he practiced this movement something around 200 times. 2 days later, late in the evening in the streets of New York. This is a true story. A guy steps out of the shadows and just holds him up at gunpoint. Now, I know you guys can't talk, but just think, what do you imagine my friend Lamar did in that moment when the gun was pointed at him? And the answer is, it's actually a two-part question. The first thing he did is he did exactly what he was trained to do. He bent the person's wrist back and he took away the gun. It's the second part, though, where the surprise happened. See, what happened is as soon as he took the gun away, he immediately handed it back to them, and he actually got himself shot in the foot. It's a true story. Now, the reason I wanted to share that story, in addition to the fact that it's just bizarre, is it's the best illustration I know of a principle in neuroscience, which is called neuroplasticity. And I'm imagining some of you have heard of it. The basic idea is that as you practice a new movement or skill, the neurons inside your brain will actually kind of rewire themselves so as to hardwire that capability inside your brain. During the past decade, in the neuroscience community, our understanding of what was happening inside Lamar's brain has just expanded immensely. And the primary factor which is driving that is biological imaging technology has now progressed to the point where we can look inside your brain with such precision. We can actually see the neural pathways as they're being built, as they dissolve. And then with that, our ability to influence this process, basically to use technology to tell the brain how to rewire itself, has similarly exploded. So during this 25-minute presentation, we're going to take a journey together into this cutting-edge science of how you can rewire your brain. And as we take the journey, we're going to make 3 stops on the way. The first thing is I want to share some of the foundational science that's powering what is actually a revolution going on in the world of neuroscience. And then I want to turn our attention to you. I want to talk about practical stuff you can do today based on technology which is out there to rewire your own brain, to improve your cognitive performance, and in fact, to reduce the likelihood of cognitive decline. And then finally, we'll turn our attention to the future, where the field is going, and because you guys are family offices, how you can actually make money by investing in this emerging industry. Now, I can't see your faces, so the only person I can ask this is that okay? But Angelo, are we good so far? Does this make sense to you?
Of course, it's fantastic. Thank you.
Wonderful. So I guess I will share my knowledge about this is not only from my professional capacity, as Angelo said, I'm a neuroscientist, but it comes from my personal experience as well. 14 years ago, I hit a low point in my life. This was the time where I had just started my first company. It was a venture-backed company, and it was going absolutely nowhere. And I was working, honestly, like 15, 16 hours a day, drinking coffee, by the gallon. But no matter what I did, I just couldn't move the needle on our performance. And then to top that off, my body started to give out on me for the first time. So back then, I weighed 25 pounds more than I do today. And I promise you, it wasn't muscle. And I just didn't know where to turn. One morning, I'll never forget this. I'm standing in front of the bathroom mirror, looking in my face, and I just say, holy cow, David, you look like a ghost. I mean, my face, it was just completely pallid. And in that moment, I said to myself, David, okay, something needs to change. Now, let me put this story on hold for a second. And I want to go back and tell you some stuff that Angelo didn't share about my childhood, because it's relevant to the rest of this story. So I grew up in a family of scientists. So my father is the guy who invented bone marrow transplantation. My mom was a world famous biochemist. No pressure, right? So the world I grew up in, the water we swam in, was the world of science and the scientific method. And so, as you heard, I grew up, I did what was expected of me. So I went to Harvard College, I went to Harvard Medical School, and, just like my father, I became a doctor, I became a scientist. So now let's fast forward again. It's 14 years ago. I'm looking at myself in the mirror. That moment was a turning point for me because I had a thought. I said to myself, okay, David, you're a scientist. What if you approach this moment the way a scientist would? And so the first thing that I did is, like any scientist, I started to measure things about myself to just try to understand what was going on. And anything you could imagine, I measured. So I measured my brain waves and I measured my blood sugar and I looked at what I was eating and so on and so forth. And, as you can imagine, a lot came out of this. What was I looking for? I was looking for patterns. I was looking for something that was measurable, that kind of was correlated with how much my life sucked in that moment. And as those patterns emerged, the next thing I did as a scientist was I started to do experiments on myself. And I did all sorts of crazy things. And as I think if you can imagine here, I went down my share of rabbit holes. But the key message to share with you is that the man sitting in front of you today on this Zoom call is a radically different guy than who you would have met 14 years ago. And I'm not talking only about my hair. By virtue of testing my own limits, mentally and physically, I rewired who I am. I turned around my body. My biological age today is 10 years younger than it was when I began measuring it. And I'll tell you, if you do the math correctly, 15 years from now, I'm going to be 8. So, that's exciting. But in addition to that, I rewired my cognitive function, and a lot of my career success, and, in fact, investing success since then, I attribute directly to this work. So I come to you speaking not only as a scientist, but also as an individual, sort of serving as a testimonial that the science we're about to discuss really can be very powerful. So with that said, let's turn to the first stop in our journey. And, and let's take a look at the science underlying this field. Angelo, you can see my screen?
Perfectly, yes.
So the foundational research, which began the industry that we're in, the kind of commercial application of neuroscience, so-called neuroperformance, was done a decade ago at a place called DARPA. Now, some of you may know what DARPA is. It stands for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's kind of the sci-fi arm of the US military. That's where the internet and stealth bomber technology, and in fact, self-driving cars came out of. So they invested as a start around $500 million to ask if you could use neuroscience to make warfighters perform better. And the first experiment they did was a really simple one. They asked the question of whether you could use neuroscience to distinguish the brain of an expert from a novice. And the task that they picked for that was marksmanship, because everybody in the military has to shoot a gun, and it's super easy to tell the difference between someone who's an expert marksman and a novice. So the way they did the experiment is simple. They took 100 of the best snipers in the US military and they scanned their brains while they were shooting. And then they compared that to novices, and what they discovered is that the expert brain knows how to get into a state that they call the zone. And when the expert is in that state, they would always make the shot. And the crazy thing about it is the novice brain didn't know how to get there. So what you see illustrated on this page is kind of a schematic of what the expert versus the novice brain looks like. And I think you would all agree, this is not a subtle difference. And the crazy thing here is that the experts, all 100 of them, this is what their brain looked like when they were in the zone to make a perfect shot. Now, in the neuroscience world, this was a very important discovery, but then they went on and they did something really cool. They said, now that we understand what the expert brain looks like, can we use technology to actually get the novice brains trained to get to that expert state? So they invented something called a neurofeedback device. It's basically a high-tech sweatband. It goes around your head, and it's got 4 sensors on it where it's measuring your brain waves. And what it's doing really simply is it's just looking at your brain waves and figuring out, is your brain in the zone or not. Then what they did is they took a haptic motor. I'll illustrate it with this pen. So it's just kind of like a wire that goes from the headband onto the collar. And the way it works is when you're not in the zone, the thing is vibrating. And then as you get into the zone, the buzzing goes away. Angelo, all good so far?
Absolutely.
Okay. So they had the novices train with this just for a month, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day for 2 or 3 days a week. And what they found is that the novices with this training, they moved 80% of the way up the learning curve toward being experts. And so this saved years of training. Then they went to intermediate snipers. These are guys who after 2 or 3 years had been unable to get to that expert state, and 80% of them became experts. And then they went back to these experts. These are the best snipers in the US military, and a significant portion of them got better with this technology. And this was a major discovery in the world of neuroscience. It was all over the media, 60 Minutes, cover of magazines. I remember it because you see, it was the first time in the neuroscience world that anyone had been able to demonstrate that they could actually measure expertise in the brain and use technology to rewire the brain to get there. So since that point, there have been several $1 billion invested, largely from the government, in investing in this type of technology to measure and upgrade the human brain. And today we can do, I hope you don't mind, we can do crazy stuff to the human brain. So, for example, we can double the brain's processing speed. You can triple learning speed. You can quadruple memory capacity. There's a lot of science where you're actually beginning to reverse cognitive decline. And this is just the beginning. So we're in the midst of this crazy scientific revolution, which is really exciting for us neuroscientists. Now, the reason I was being asked to be on this podcast, though, is not because of the science, but because of the commercial and practical implications of this. And what I can share with you is we are now at a point with the science where it's about to make its way into the commercial world, creating a true industrial revolution. And there are 4 factors that are driving this conversion. The first one is that consumer demand for anything related to the brain is just through the roof and growing quickly. And this has been studied a great deal based on blog postings, book sales, consumer behavior on Amazon. But the fact is, if you go to any magazine store, you'll see 10, 15, 20% of the magazine covers are about the brain. So anything people can do to understand their brain, measure it, improve sleep and the like, there's a lot of interest. The second thing is that we're at a point where the technology can now be produced in a really powerful way, affordably and at scale. So you've got consumer demand, you've got the ability to produce it. From an investment perspective, and this is relevant to you as family offices, the economic returns associated with this industry are very well established. So for example, last year, there was, get this, a startup pre-revenue neuroscience company called Control Labs that Facebook bought for essentially $1 billion, generating massive returns for their investors just because the space is so hot. So when I started my company 3 years ago, there were $35 million total from Silicon Valley into the space. Last year, it was $1 billion. So it's taking off. It's an investment arena, of course, as the dollars pour in, it makes the industry go faster. But the key thing which is driving it is the 4th thing, which is the value proposition in multiple arenas, whether it's sports or finance or video gaming or education, are so powerful. When you take people and you make their brains better, it becomes something where it's rapidly becoming a necessity. And so as it said on the cover, it is very clear to us who are in this world that this technology is soon going to be pervasive. And so this is going to have an impact on all of us as consumers. And in addition to that, from an investment perspective, there are going to be people who make an enormous amount of money as the industry evolves. Okay. Angelo, should I keep going?
Please.
Okay.
Tremendous.
So this is the first section. We've talked a little bit about the science. I want to turn my attention now to you. So this technology is just beginning to make its way into the commercial marketplace. And I believe what many of you may be asking is, well, okay, so what can I buy? What can I go, to Amazon or whatever and purchase today to use to make my own brain better? And so what I'll tell you is there's going to be a lot more in 2 or 3 years, but there's already stuff making its way into the market. And if you want to know the tool out there that has the most validity from a science perspective in terms of if you do this, your brain will get better. It's an application which is called BrainHQ. It's made by Posit Science. I've got nothing, I mean, I know these guys, we have no economic interest in them, but I can tell you the science is extremely solid. I believe last I heard it costs $9 a month to download. Just go onto your app store and buy it. And what I'll share with you is there have been nearly a dozen very good academic articles. And if you do this for 50 hours, the training, you will see dramatic, permanent improvement in things like your memory, your processing speed, your ability to sort of cognitively combine a lot of information. And not only that, the statistics suggest that it will reduce the likelihood of you getting Alzheimer's disease or cognitive decline by something around 25 to 30%. So I want to ask you, is it worth making that 50-hour investment to have those goals achieved? And I think the answer is definitively yes. And it's work. It's just like doing physical training, but those 50 hours pay off. And everyone I've ever had who's done this has come back to me and said, yeah, I didn't love the 50 hours, but holy cow, my brain is better. So you'll feel the difference. Just to give you a sense of how this works, I want to just show you one example of a way that the brain training works. This is something which is used widely in the professional sports world. So pretty much every professional basketball player, at least in the US, does this training. It's a way of training what's called visual processing speed, how fast your brain can sort of see and process information. And the science around this is really compelling. It makes you see more quickly. It'll improve your driving. It'll reduce the likelihood of falling and tripping and the like. And not only that, this has what's called neuroprotective effect. And so I just want to show you how it works. What's going to happen is, in a moment, I'm going to push play, and it's going to go through a little video. And in that experience, these 4 orange balls are going to turn yellow. So they're going to be the same color as these, and then they're going to start moving around the screen. And your job is to notice where the 4 orange balls are now and then keep track of them after they've turned yellow and moved around. Angela, does that explanation make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so you ready? I'll do your 3, 2, 1, as you do. That's how, for those of you who aren't on it, that's how Angelo began the podcast. So I'll push play, they turn yellow and move around, see if you can track them. Here it goes. Hold on. So how'd you guys do? Of course, I can't see your faces, so I have absolutely no idea which ones of you succeeded. But what I can tell you is, if you're a professional basketball player, that would have been very easy. For most people, that's a hard thing. But here's the key message. If you train your brain, not for that long, that becomes a trivial exercise because you rewire in the same way Lamar did. And so again, I just want to ask you, is it worth it to make this 50 hours of investment in your brain to protect it and to improve your cognitive function? And so with that, let's move to the third stop in our journey and talk about where the commercial industry is going, how this is going to affect you, and in fact, if you're interested in investing, how you can make money in this space. Actually, I'm going to hold on this slide and just set it up for the moment. So for the purposes of this, I actually want to show you some research that came out of my company called Optios, which I think will give you an indication of where the field is going, at least in the next few years. We did a really cool project that just wrapped up a couple months ago, working with financial traders. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with these kinds of people, very different kind of investing than family office investing, but they They're the people who work for large hedge funds like a Point72 or Citadel. They sit in front of like 35 monitors and they're just trading stocks back and forth all day. And the group we worked with, they're called proprietary traders. They were very active. So they made 30 or 40 trades every day. Over the course of a 10-week period, we put an EEG headset on them and we monitored their brains while they were working. So at the end of the 10-week study, we had data on tens of thousands of trades, and we had thousands of hours of brainwave recording. And then what we did is we said, can we use our company's AI and machine learning platform to see if we can predict, based on their brain state, whether one of their trades would be profitable or not? Make sense? And I'll tell you, the results, to use the technical neuroscience term, are truly mind-blowing. It turns out that after 300 trades, we are able to find a unique signature brain pattern in each one of the traders that's highly predictive of if they're going to make a profitable trade or not. And so let me show you the data now. The first thing here is just as kind of a classic machine learning thing, which shows you that we were able to beat chance actually by a little more than 9%. Again, after only 300 trades. And in the machine learning world, this is huge. But the other thing is, because the system keeps getting smarter and smarter as you get more data in it, we also have clarity that once we have 3,000 or 5,000 trades, that 59% will be up in the low 70s. Again, it's an amazingly powerful tool. We then did a little experiment where we said, what would have happened if we would have taken all of the times when the machine learning system predicted that there would be a profit, and we doubled the size of that bet, and every time that we predicted a loss, we canceled the trade, and it turned out it would have moved the needle by 5.5 percentage points, which I think you guys know, in the hedge fund world where they're managing billions of dollars, is a massive amount of money. So we, from a commercial perspective and from a scientific perspective, are really excited about this in terms of the economic opportunity for our company. Angelo didn't talk about this, but my last company was a pretty big success. It was the fastest growing company in the country. We returned 90x to our initial investors, and based on this, I think we feel very well positioned once again to generate those returns. So we're really excited about the future for us. But I want to talk more broadly about the implications of this kind of science for the industry writ large. And so what you're going to be seeing from a commercial perspective over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, is you're going to see the emergence of companies that do 3 types of things. The first, and many of you may have heard about Elon Musk's company Neuralink, are people who are making devices, consumer-level devices, to monitor their brain. And you're going to see all sorts of form factors. We have one that makes golfers better, so it's a sweatband. But there's going to be a lot of these, and so there's a bunch of investment opportunity in the hardware space. The second one is on the software space, where you're going to see companies coming out with the ability to monitor your brain. This is the same way as like an Apple Watch is monitoring your heart rate or the number of steps. You're going to be in a place where 5 years from now, you'll be able to put earphones in or a little sweatband on, and in any moment, you'll know the brain state you're in. And then finally, kind of the really cool thing is things that allow you to rewire your brain, to train your brain, to induce new brain states, to actually elevate performance. And I would assert that 5 years from now, it is very likely that everyone on the Zoom call is going to be wearing something on their head and using this type of technology in order to elevate your own brain. So it's a wildly exciting industrial revolution, which is going to change the nature of what it is to be human and create a lot of economic value. But that's only the beginning. So let's talk for just a moment about what's going to happen 10 years or 15 years from now. And in this, I want to just share one more experiment with you. A couple of years ago at MIT in Boston, they did a really interesting neuroscience experiment. They took mice And through a kind of an old school technique, they taught the mice how to run through a maze. And people have been doing this since the 1950s, but what was different here is they monitored the brains of these mice with little mini brainwave monitoring devices, and they took a recording of what happened in the mouse's brain when it knew how to run the maze, put it on a little microchip, and then inserted that microchip into the brain of another mouse who had never seen the maze. And I want to ask you, what do you think that new mouse knew how to do once the microchip was inserted? And I'm guessing that you're saying, I bet he knew how to run the maze. And guess what? That's exactly right. So this was an example, a real life example, where they actually implanted a memory into a mouse using a microchip. And I just want to ask you, for those of you who are in relationships, can you see a use case where you would want to implant a memory in your partner's brain? Any place where this could be useful? Angelo?
Yes.
So
in personal and business.
Personal and business, exactly. So based on science of this sort, it is very realistic to say that within the next 10 to 15 years, we are going to be able to do stuff like what you see on this slide, where we will be able to augment your sensory capabilities with brain technology, where you can start to see, for example, in the ultraviolet spectrum the way bees do. You will have brain implants to download the ability to do math better or to learn a new language. And with that, you're going to start connecting your brains to other people's brains. The idea of you having information going to other brains or connecting it to the internet or the internet of things. And with this, completely new models for how people do teaming, connection in a variety of arenas. You see a list of things here, but the truth is it's going to foundationally change what it means to be human. And we really are at the forefront of a new world, which we call Human 2.0. Now, Angelo, if you're interested, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about my company. We do have we're sort of at the close of an investment round if someone's interested in that, but that's not the purpose of this call unless people want to talk about it. So at this point, I'm going to stop my screen share and then open this up for whatever commentary or questions you want. But I hope you found this useful so far.
Well, thank you, David. That was fantastic. And even those that will likely only hear this on audio, so they're not going to be able to see that 10 or 15 second, the moving basketballs, which was great. And by the way, I failed miserably at it. I need that BrainHQ. And that's commercially available right now?
Yeah, I think you can just go to an app store and download it. Yeah, it's...
Oh, okay.
$9 a month. I think if you just get it from iTunes or whatever.
So this was great. I'm going to ask you questions that are probably going to sound almost a little too rudimentary and probably appear a little bit too linear along the lines of what you're talking about, because you went incredibly exponential, especially looking forward 10 or 15 years where, imagine the use case from, it almost sounds like aspects of the very forward-thinking movie from 20 years ago, The Matrix, where could you download specific knowledge and think of the good and the bad, what that in theory could do to in the wrong hands with nuclear weapon knowledge. Also, 4 years plus of college education condensed into a much shorter window without the social and personal growth perspective, but the pure skill perspective that may change. And we've been talking about ed tech and major changes happening forever. I think COVID is arguably pushing that along. But what you're talking about could change everything as we know it in 10 or 15 years.
Yes, and I want to comment that even today, neuroscience technology can triple learning speeds. And so, of course, there's a massive amount of investment effectively an arms race in online educational technology. And I think it's an inevitability that within the next 3 to 5 years, neuroscience technology will be integrated into that. And so while people are learning, they're going to be monitoring their brains and using that to influence the way in which information is coming to them. And it's going to be very powerful. So it's that's absolutely a really important, and socially good use case, both in the near term and, as you say, in the longer term, once you start downloading information.
It's already happening with some of the hedge funds and black box, and you have apparently experience with this. And again, I was partially joking initially, but yeah, I'm in the hotbed of that. I've interviewed so many of the top managers in the world, and I've had many of them speak at my physical events before. Steve Cohen, Ray Dalio, Tudor Jones, people like Peter Thiel, and many others. What you're describing, especially as that technology advances, and again, kind of a good and bad, is you're talking about the good aspect, enhancing a trader's capability to make the right decision. If I'm looking at it as a founder or someone a little bit more, could I save money and make more money for me? What could I learn from that and put an application in AI and machine learning where I don't need a 7-figure earning trader? I'm capitalizing on the heavy lifting that they did, and now I'm creating machines and algorithms to do that for me.
Yeah, there's no question. This can be used, right, in the hedge fund world. Many of the hedge funds, this isn't true for Tudor, but it is certainly true for places like, Point72, Steve Cohen's shop, or Citadel, where they do have a center book, and to the extent that they are monitoring the brains of the traders, they can use that information to manage their center book and make money for the founders and the investors without accruing to the benefit of the traders. So that's, and I want to say, we could spend all of our time talking about the ethical implications, and they are extremely important, of extreme concern to us and everyone in the industry. Like many scientific revolutions, it can be used for good or evil. It is an inevitability that it's coming, and it is incumbent on all of us to do everything we can to use it as a force for good, for elevating humanity. And and that's an area that we and our colleagues are really quite focused on.
Of course.
But your point's well taken.
And I do have a fair amount of questions, but I also want my audience to interact. And someone did send in a question that relates a little bit to effectively the investment opportunities that you left off at. Let me read her question and allow you to expand upon it. She asked, what do you perceive to be the largest potential market opportunities, applications for this technology? Followed up by, what are some of the promising early stage companies that appear to have a leadership in this field?
Yeah, so those are obviously two different questions. And Julie, let me say, I think that's an excellent question, and something that that we of course spend a whole lot of time thinking about. I want to try to formulate my answer in an intelligent way. So as a starting point, I think it's fair to say that this technology is going to be pervasive in 5 to 7 years. And so what's going to happen in the marketplace is it'll find its way into one use case where it has a huge impact and where there's a lot of interest, and then it'll be in another use case, and then over time, it'll be in a bunch of them, and it'll just finally become integrated into your Fitbit, or into your video gaming technology, or into your ed tech. And so one way to answer that question is what are the use cases where it's going to go the fastest, and the other is what are the biggest ones. So by far and away, the first industry where this is not only going to affect things, but in fact has already affected things, is professional athletics, soon to be followed by college athletics. So today in professional football and professional basketball, increasingly soccer and baseball, this technology is already in use. And so what I showed you there, there's no professional basketball player who's not doing brain training on this. Steph Curry was the guy who kind of popularized it, but today, it's the #1 strategic priority for head coaches, and in many cases, general managers of sports teams, for kind of blindingly obvious reasons. I think that the finance industry is a natural application area, and so my expectation is that within a couple of years, hedge funds are all going to be using it, and then that'll be soon followed by the large banks and the like, particularly for people who are making active, frequent trading decisions. And this is market makers and the traders and the like. But ultimately, everyone wants to measure their brain because, as Angelo said, it's an area of tremendous interest. So I think sports and finance are probably the first two places it's going to have an impact. I think that workforce management and education are probably the next two, and those are both much larger application areas, but those probably won't happen for another couple of years. In the workforce management area, I'll give you an example. There's good scientific evidence to suggest that this technology can improve the productivity of software engineers by somewhere around 25 or 30%, and it'll also reduce their error rates. Now, if you think about that, that is solving the core issue that companies have in software engineering, because right now, there's much more demand than there is supply for software engineers. There's 487,000 open positions in the software engineering arena. So if you can make your workforce meaningfully more productive, it's a huge thing. And so I think it's very likely that within a couple or 3 years, anyone who's doing software engineering is going to be using this type of technology. Of course, it's going into video gaming just because video gamers like this and it'll make your brain better and you can monitor it. And then I think ed tech is probably the next major vertical. But with that said, I could talk to you about all sorts of things: air traffic control and surgeons and insurance underwriters. So over the next several years, you're going to just see industry after industry incorporating this until the point where, when you go to your local LA Fitness, you're just going to wind up having a brain monitoring device while you're doing a training course, and it'll just become part of where you live. So that's the first of your two questions, but let me pause and see if that's a sufficient answer, and then we'll talk about the landscape of where the good companies are. Angelo, is that good?
Yes. And she does appear to be happy with your answer. Julie, thank you. She goes, yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I can, by the way, I can read the chat function if you want. I don't know if you want to read the...
Well, for those that are listening to it from an audio perspective and not on video in the future, it may be helpful for them to hear that.
Yeah.
We had someone on in July that spoke on somewhat of a similar topic, and they were a medical doctor at heart as well, and a scientist and an entrepreneur now, talking about, and if you feel it's something that you don't necessarily have an expertise in, that's fine. But all of us that have children or grandchildren are concerned about our young ones. And unfortunately, there seems to be greater and greater children that have ADD, attention deficit disorder. Has there been any early stage work with companies you're familiar with that would help, let's call it children, but if they have it as children, they're probably going to have it as adults too. But I seem to be a little more focused for my question on children. Has there been any advancements that you could see that are helping with that issue?
Yeah, so I have good news for you on that front. There has been an immense amount of really fruitful scientific research in the area of ADD. And so there are two kinds of technology which have been scientifically validated as being able to help. The first one is neurofeedback, the same kind of thing that's done with the snipers, where you try to get more brain activity in the front part of the brain, which is the place where you can generate attention. And there's a number of scientific research papers showing that actually, in many times, kind of a miraculous piece of benefit. Also, the kind of technology that BrainHQ has, it's different technology, but the idea of brain training to rewire the brain to improve attention. And so I think it's fair to say, the industry there is called digital therapeutics. We do neuroperformance, which is for healthy people, but the same technology in the medical world is called digital therapeutics. And so both of those are established, and there's a lot of investment by drug companies and the like. And so there is an increasing amount of technology and a lot of dollars in companies focused on capitalizing on that. I think the most well-known company in that arena, but there's several of them now, is a company called Achille, which comes out of UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, which has gone through clinical trials for ADD treatment using brain training, and with phenomenal results and the expectation of therapeutic treatment. So yeah, it's a very promising field, and I think I think we can make a big impact. The problem there is we're fighting technology. And so if you think about it, everything about the modern world is training your brain to have ADD. We say it's kind of a problem, but what you got to understand is if you're a kid and you've got, you got your iPad and you got your TV and you've got your phone and you're switching back between 30 windows at one time, you're teaching your brain to not have the ability to focus. And so what's actually happening, which is the really sad thing, is that the technological revolution, the social media revolution, is actually inducing ADD in the brains. And so all of this technology, these digital therapeutics, are seeking to counteract just what the technology revolution is doing to people. And so, of course, it's just kind of like a war between these two things. And again, there could be all sorts of ethical discussions, but that's the answer to your question.
I'm going to see if I can properly phrase my next question when I preface it with that. Probably not, but I think you'll get the gist of it. We were led to believe, and is it true, that effectively our IQ is somewhat determined at birth? Some of our surroundings, perhaps our food, the environment, our education, could have a little bit of impact on it. But for the most part, it kind of is what it is. There are some people that have gifted IQs, let's call it a Ferrari, but they break down all the time. There are some people that may have a Chevy, but that Chevy runs perfectly. Is this potentially literally increasing IQ, or is it just enhancing the capabilities you have inside you?
It's literally increasing IQ. So the evidence would suggest that based on technology we have today, you should be able to improve your IQ by about 1 standard deviation. So let's say you have an IQ of 100, it's very realistic with brain training to bring it up to 110 or 115.
Okay, that's pretty significant. That's the lower end of average to on the almost higher end of average in the example that you gave.
Yeah, and it can move someone who's at 120 into the genius level. Yeah, there is no question, and by the way, that's not just brain training, diet and sleep, and your IQ will depend on how you eat, how well you sleep, how your body is taking care of itself, because understand your brain's an organ. And so just like your muscles, as you take care of your body, as you eat right, as you sleep right, it's going to have an impact on the brain. So what people are led to believe, this notion that your brain is fixed, is just dead wrong. When I went to medical school, that's what we believed. But the most important neuroscience discovery is what I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, which is your brain is plastic. It can be rewired and upgraded. So it is just dead wrong to imagine you got the brain you were born with. You can absolutely train and improve your brain. And if you do it, it has, as it happened to me, a massive impact on your effectiveness, your life experience, your ability to function. And that both of the topics you talked about are addressable.
Well, you're kind of answering my next question, and it would have been a different answer perhaps if I would have asked you this or someone this 15, 20 years ago. I learned that by approximately the age of 26, your brain is fully developed. Did that mean that as it's evolving, you have a chance to increase your critical thinking, that it's still evolving, but you're also irrational and impulse control is not at its peak? On the other hand, as we get older, do we tend to become rigid in our thoughts? Are you basically saying that forget about that theory of at 20, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? That's just completely not true.
That's just completely not true. I mean, and I want to be really clear. I was taught the same thing when I went to medical school. And there was a lot of really interesting science, which kind of 35, 40 years ago made people think the brain was fixed. And so, scientists really were like acting in good faith here. And then there were a series of experiments where people were like, holy shit, what just happened to the brain? Where you thought it was fixed, and people said, I think that you moved the index finger in this part of the brain, and then this happened, and then they did this, and then it moved. And so then people were like, wait, something's happening. And then again, the most important discovery in neuroscience is in the last 20 years is it's just wrong. A 90-year-old's brain is rewiring so quickly that 3 weeks from today, it's going to look really different than it is today. It's not just like it can rewire. Our brains are continually rewiring themselves. Now, if the way you live creates habitual stuff, yeah, of course you will solidify. And so if you don't keep your brain active, it's going to atrophy just like a muscle. But the key message is, even in that case, it's rewiring. And if you train it and if you work with it, right, you can keep it young, you can keep it healthy, you can reduce the likelihood of cognitive decline, you can improve your intelligence, you can learn a new language. And think about this. If a brain was really fixed at 26, how could you learn a new language at 27? Right? I mean, it's just not possible. So when you think about it, of course the brain's rewiring, right?
A related question. I did a master class where I spoke about some of my personal experiences in health and wellness and improving my mind and my body, from meditation to learning a second language to, for me, and this is just me, I'm not saying it works for everyone, extreme cold water exposure, to exercise, to sleep. And I probably got about 30 or 40 responses basically saying that's all bullshit. None of that works. Your IQ is your IQ, and how you make decisions is based on your inherent capability coupled with your experience. I think you're proving me at least partially right. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate, but you kind of already did. Sleep is impactful. You didn't really talk about meditation or breathing or certain philosophies that others are doing, and even philosophies like practicing the Pomodoro technique to be more productive. 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes off, or 50 minutes of work, 10 minutes off. And for me, critical thinking appears to be better in the morning, like I think it is for most people, but my creative thinking appears to be better later in the afternoon. I'm sure there are people that work the opposite of that, but that probably is most classic. Are these principles that I'm describing, yes, it appears like everyone can enhance. I'm not even talking about IQ. I'm just talking about being more productive.
Yeah, I want to be really careful in answering your question, Angelo, because there's a lot of snake oil out there and people promising that they can kind of create miracle cures and like overnight, you take this, whatever herb derived from the, whatever.
Oh, I didn't even mention nootropic.
But what I want to say is, think logically. If you go 2 nights and you don't sleep, do you really believe your brain's not functioning differently than it does when you're well slept? I mean, everybody knows
for sure.
If you're tired enough, your brain gets worse. So there's gobs and gobs and gobs of scientific evidence that getting a lot of sleep makes your brain better. And there's books written about it. And there's just no question. It improves memory. It improves all sorts of things, makes your immune response better, right? And so it's absolutely the case that taking good care of your health does have an impact on your brain. Now, with that said, 98% of what's out there on the internet talking about how you can make your brain better is just wrong, right? It's just kind of marketing hype, right? So I showed you this thing called BrainHQ because it's scientifically validated, but I guarantee you if you go and you look for brain training, you're going to find 50 games and 48 or 49 of them are just, some marketing person who has no idea how to train the brain. And, in fact, there have been lawsuits about this and the like. So you have to be a really educated consumer. And I will tell you, one of the things which is, sad about being in my industry is there are so many snake oil salesmen who promise, this technique is going to make you better. So you got to look at the science and the evidence. But there is wheat among this massive amount of chaff. You can absolutely make your brain better, and the science is dispositive, right? It's absolutely, I'm not coming here talking about like one research experiment. I'm talking about thousands of research experiments over a decade of time. This is established fact in the neuroscience world.
When I am asked by people about like the most important skill, if I could call it a skill, working as a senior level person in a family office. And when I was reading my open, I did mention it. I'm looking at it now. I help global families and their family offices solve problems. So problem solving, I'm assuming, relates to critical thinking. So what you're talking about, including the exercise you showed us with the basketballs, and again, people on video aren't going to quite get it, but watch the video, you'll get it. These are scientifically proven methods to effectively enhance your critical thinking, correct?
Right. I mean, if you've got, whatever, $500 million under management and you're trying to make investment decisions, having an optimized brain kind of makes a lot of sense, right? Because you have to sort of pull in information. And look, I showed evidence that you can measure things in the brain about whether someone's making a good investment decision or a bad investment decision, right? We can tell you if your brain looks like this, you're going to make a smart investment. If your brain looks like that, you're going to lose money. And so that's just kind of, again, it's not only common sense, it's sort of scientific fact. And so I think it's not a smart thing to ignore your brain if you're in a business where having, intelligence matters. Now, look, if what you're doing is you're investing in something where you don't have to do any thinking, that doesn't make any difference. But if you're making, if you're investing in specific equities, or if you're investing according to a specific philosophy where you're really trying to integrate information, I mean, I would think it makes a lot of sense. And by the way, I want to just say this. I don't know what your policy is, but this is something I feel a lot of passion around. And so if anyone on this, here kind of wants to talk to me or us about this further, happy to get on a call, send you resources. If you want to think about it from an investment perspective, happy to do that. If you want to just sort of understand the lay of the land, if you want to talk about your kid and, your kid is having some sort of neurological issue, that's what I do for a living. And it's a great privilege to be able to offer that. So I just want to make sure everyone who hears this knows, just write me an email and I'm happy to get on the phone with you. And,
well, that's very kind of you. And I would, recommend that, Dr. Bach's time is very busy. And if it's something that requires probably more than a quick email response, it's only fair that he's running a business as well. Because this will likely be produced as a podcast, in theory, the whole world could hear it. So I don't want you to get bombarded by hundreds and hundreds of kind of random requests.
Angelo, I've been doing this long enough, and I know no one's going to reach out to me unless it's important. But I mean, it's an important use of my time, and this is the thing I care about the most. So I appreciate it, but really, an email anytime. I will answer all emails, and I'm happy to get on the phone for and keep anything confidential. So if it's a personal thing or something with your kids, or if you want to talk more kind of in the business world, just really happy to do that.
Because you have such a tremendous track record as an entrepreneur, and you laid out a case for the growth of this industry. And I do have some questions, but we'll stay on this topic for a minute or two. For those that would like to learn more about your current company and to reach out to you, how could they do that?
My request is you send it up, but the email address is david@optios.com. So DAVID, just my first name, at Optios. That's OPTIOS.com. And again, I'm really happy to take calls. I don't expect I'm going to get bombarded. I've been doing this for a long time.
And a reminder,
and your listeners are awesome, right? I mean, you've got an incredibly cool group of people, and so it would be a privilege to connect with you.
I hope so. A reminder, because there's some investment dialogue today and certainly tremendous opportunities, in my opinion, for more qualified purchaser plus family office, sophisticated investors. A reminder, do your own diligence. We're doing this from an educational and an entertainment perspective, but as an investor, you should be sophisticated. You should be a qualified purchaser plus at minimum, in my opinion, and you need to do your own diligence based on your risk tolerance and anything that relates relative to your capital. So just simply a reminder on that. Related to the question about the age 26, about the things that you're talking about solving problems, critical thinking, our audience, because we've covered it a fair amount with a number of psychologists, are going to be familiar, at least from an amateur perspective, with the term executive function and the ability to regulate our emotions. We've had Dr. Mark Brackett at Yale on emotional intelligence, impulse control, cognitive thinking, decision-making, the fallacy or reality of multitasking. I'm assuming, I don't want to assume, but I'm going to make the assumption that what you're talking about, including with BrainHQ and others to be developed soon, absolutely will have an impact, I hope a positive one, on one's executive function.
Yes, it'll have, I mean, it has a very strong positive impact on executive function. It's not so much around impulse control. So BrainHQ is really to make you smarter, right? So it improves your memory, it improves your processing speed and the like. If what you're looking for is impulse control, I would recommend other things. But there's good science around that as well, and that's not something that's given where we are at the time. What I would say is I'm happy to take that offline if someone wants to write to me about it, but it's a bit of a more complicated issue than I can do with a sort of a soundbite.
Yes, and that's a good point. I think impulse control is incredibly important. Again, one horrific decision could impact you for the rest of your life. And arguably, it's deeper than this, but there's a reason why a little over 50% of marriages end in divorce. And that is impactful, again, likely for someone's full life. So making better decisions is important. Your IQ, intelligence, emotional intelligence plays into it. But I am a big believer in understanding and regulating emotions and impulse control. Not to say that it's something that I'm naturally great at, but something that if you're not superior at, you should be aware of that, understand that's a weakness of yours, and potentially, if there's ways, and there are, to get better at it, you probably should.
Well, let me just say as a soundbite here, sure. We've done a bunch of work with professional sports teams and have an extremely strong ability to measure impulse control and basically predict who's going to kind of get thrown out of a game, based on their brainwaves. And so it's a very well-known and understood science, and it's frankly important. If you think about the hedge fund world, right? The truth is, traders. I was just talking to a guy this morning who used to work with Steve Cohen, and learning to maintain your impulses when things get tense, when the market's going crazy or you just lost $70 million in a bet or something, keeping cool under pressure, that's really the key to success. And so it's a big deal, and it is definitely the stuff of neuroscience that we can have a big impact on.
And it's likely my last question, and it's a little off topic, but typical for me, so you probably shouldn't be surprised, but it does relate to it. Because you do mention sports and other areas of critical thinking. Sometimes I give the analogy when I'm coaching or working with families and executives is poker and chess. And I think they're both great. And chess is great, but some of the problems that I would attribute it to is it's unrealistic to real life. 100% of the information is directly equally there for both parties. There's a certain sequence, at least how we initiate the game and how the pieces are arranged. Is it good for thinking through things? I think it is, but it's imperfect. Poker is so much more like real life. We have incomplete information, and there is an element of luck. I don't think I've ever met a billionaire who off record didn't admit to me, and usually again, creating their wealth from building a company and having an exit, that luck and timing absolutely 100% played into what made them hyper successful. Therefore, I don't quite know what my question is, but the things that you're talking about, brain, IQ, HQ, whatever it's called, and the other things that you're working on, in theory, is getting better at poker and chess, making us better at making decisions and investing in real life.
So I'm going to go way over my skis here because, remember, I'm a scientist and I don't like to say things unless I can kind of pull out a scientific research paper. And there's no scientific paper I'm aware of to show kind of chess or poker makes you better. I will tell you, I used to work at TA Associates, right? And the guy who ran the firm in that time period was really brilliant. I mean, it was just absolutely brilliant. More around knowing how to get out of investments than in. A guy named Kevin Landry, and he was a poker player in college and attributed a lot of his ability as a negotiator to what he learned as a poker player. And having been in a number of situations where I was kind of on the other side of that negotiation, I can tell you he was certainly very skilled there. So I don't know about the science around it, but I definitely know that people in the investment world who are skilled at poker that I've run across sure believe that it's been really helpful to them. And it's my sense that, it's a very similar skill set to play poker and to be a good negotiator. I'm a chess player. I was a chess player as a kid. And so I like to think that it actually helped me in a lot of ways, but I agree, it's a whole different thing. And, I will tell you, trying to fool your opponent when you're playing chess actually matters. It's more of a psychological game than you think. And so you really do want to kind of mislead your opponent when you get to a higher level. But anyway, I hope that's a useful answer. It's something
it's very useful.
I look, anything you do to entertain your brain, to train your brain, is good, right? Because it's rewiring it, it's making it stronger. It's like testing your muscles or going running or whatever. And so, as a neuroscientist, I'm a huge fan of anything you do which stretches your cognitive abilities and which is enjoyable. And I think both of those can be very enjoyable, except for when they're really not enjoyable. So,
well, thank you so much, Dr. David Bach. And I did leave questions on the table, but that makes me want to have you back, perhaps the earlier part of next year, on again and learn more about the advancements of your company. Again, you have a tremendous track record as an entrepreneur, and you're obviously very accredited and very engaged by your field that you're in, and one that I find completely fascinating. I am going to give a bit of a close. Sometimes it's a little long-winded. I'll try to keep it a little quicker. I really enjoyed our discussion today. This is a topic that I'm just personally curious about. And anything that could enhance my IQ even slightly, I am just going to go in and download from my iPhone what Dr. Bach noted, and look forward to learning more about his company and the advancements upcoming that hopefully, I and my relationships, I hope to bring to my members and my followers cutting edge information. One of my members put it best, Angelo, I probably listen to, 3 or 4 of your interviews every week. And although I may find them entertaining, I probably walk away with only one idea that I could kind of follow up with. And you know what? Often that one idea is worth it. But I may need to shift through a couple of different speakers or your questions or some that are so off topic I don't get. But every now and then you nail something that's very topical for me and may literally mean better decisions, more money, whatever it may be. So I'll settle for that. That's like a baseball player hitting 300. I guess he failed 7 out of 10 times, but the 300, the 30% that he's at makes him one of the top players in his game. So I'll use that same analogy. Hopefully I can come through with that as well. As noted, I am the host of the Angelo Robles Podcast. I'm active on YouTube. Go and subscribe. Simply on Family Office on YouTube. So very easy. And I'm the founder and CEO at Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to successful families and their family offices, providing significant proprietary content, thought leadership, content in terms of writing books, videos, one-on-ones with me. We also do private consulting, mainly as I open my podcast from critical thinking, solving problems, intergenerational necessity, and really adapting and reinventing during the challenging times now where we're remote and everything is changing. And many of you know I talk about my big 3, number 1 being people, followed by your systems, followed by your technology. I won't bore you to death with too much on that now, but certainly go to familyofficeassociation.com, especially if you're not a member, and learn more. And my direct email is angelo@familyofficeassociation.com. Dr. Bach, thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Thank you.